Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
You know, I've listened to your music since these babies came out. Like, you know.
Wow, those are old.
They are really old.
For me.
No, but they are. You know, come on, that's like 2005, 2004. So.
Well, actually, the Credo record was recorded in '99.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I want to ask you then later about this, but I first want to start our talk with. I watched the other day this solo you did. I think it was from last year at home. You on solo sax on electronics, and then solo saxophone, like pure solo, which I love that one. Like 20 minutes of. And
thank you. Thanks for checking it out.
So beautiful, but I wanted to ask you how you approach a thing like that. First of all, like a solo saxophone gig or a solo impro on saxophone. I mean, you know, it's not a harmonic instrument. So how do you approach these gigs or situations?
Well, there's not one single general way. I mean, I think the first thing that happened to me when I started playing solo is it's really hard to be alone, to even because you're not alone. There are, at least for me, there's like a million voices and things.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
So to actually, you know, come to some sense of stillness and be able to play from that, there's the fear of boring people, and there's also accepting the space. So it's different. Like I was doing this project with piano. That I did a record.
Echos la Nuit or Echos la Nuit.
Yeah,
I love that. I wanted to ask you.
Man.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So that's definitely like, that's, you know, what I think the way I approach that is that I'm a listener in it. You know, I'm listening to, there's both control and non-control, which I think is the same thing as in the electronics piece.
Yeah.
But in both those situations, I'm trying to create something in which I'm really put in a position of having to listen to what's happening and have some control, but also be surprised by what's coming back to me.
Yeah.
So in the case of Echos la Nuit, the piano stuff, is that, I mean, that was a process over several years where at the beginning it was very dry. I mean, the rule was that I'm playing saxophone with left hand and piano with right hand. And so I have these restrictions of how many notes I can play with only one hand on the saxophone. And also I'm not a pianist, I don't have piano chops.
Okay.
So it was very reduced. And also there were some rules like only unisons. Like the first few times I would do it, no octaves, in other words, no octave doublings.
Oh, wow.
As soon as there was an octave, because as soon as there was an octave doubling, there was suddenly something generic about that note. The note lost its flavor. The event lost its energy. The piece would suddenly collapse. It's like, you know, like the center of it would just start to sag. I could feel it, you know. So it was very kind of dry, and it was all about just that meditation and those intentional or non-intentional microtonal rubs from being a little bit out of tune with the piano, which creates the vibration. So at first it was that. It was very, very sparse, and then slowly, you know, each time I did it, I would allow myself a new freedom. At first, like I could never, like the rule was I could never play saxophone with both hands.
That's heavy, man.
I mean, it was a little nuts, but you know, but it was a way, you know, it was a way to kind of combat certain tendencies in myself, which is to kind of gush, you know, play a lot of notes. So really, you know, and then I started using the pedal, and that opened up a whole world. Because as you know, when you're playing into the piano, the strings vibrate with sympathy. There's the resonance, and because on most of the piano keys have 3 strings attached to them, you know, and the outer strings are slightly out of tune from the center one, which creates the voicing of the piano, right? So if you target that slightly out of tune string, and then you hit the key, you get immediately these beats in the resonance.
Yeah.
You know, like you're getting with the sound of the saxophone, I'm getting the strings to vibrate in resonance to a note that's slightly out of tune from the key. So then you start to get all these colors and ghosts and echoes, you know.
Echoes, yeah. How did you come up with this idea, with this project in the beginning? what was behind it? Like,
I think it would be warming up. Like before a gig, I'd be playing with people. If there was a piano, I would just go and try to, especially if the piano was going to be played by somebody, I'd want to get to know what its tuning was, in a sense, because every piano is different in its sound, and also get myself in tune. And then I started discovering this thing where, playing these melodies would start to happen when I'm playing in unison with myself. It's a melody that's happening in two different sound worlds simultaneously, but coming from the same brain, which created a weird trance effect where everything felt written. Everything felt like it was being composed because it was being doubled. Yeah. When you hear that kind of doubling, it's because it's written in general, of two very different. So it was this strange psychological experience of like instant inscription, which to me is what improvisation should be anyway, right? It's like composition in real time. But that really kind of honed it in,
Yeah.
And people would kind of like go, what the hell? Like if they said nothing else about the rest of the gig, they would say, wow, that thing you were doing when you were warming up, that was wild, So it just started evolving, and then soon it became a thing where I could actually have a conversation with the piano resonance. But anyway, all of this to say is that it develops this kind of awareness of what's happening between the actions of playing a note. Yeah. So there's we're so focused on the act, on the if you're a painter, like the mark that you're making on the canvas, and you start to lose sight of how that mark is part of something else, which is this field, the sonic field. And so solo is not really solo. There's the room. Even if I'm not using the piano, there's the response of the room, and then the sense of the piece unfolding. And being in. Yeah. So like all of that stuff is connected. I think so. In the electronics part, the thing that you're talking about, it's the same thing where I set up these different kinds of patches, sounds, samples. And they're different lengths, so I never know how they're going to line up exactly. And
that's so cool.
I don't want to be completely in control.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a looper pedal always. You loop something, and it's like instead of being in 4, it's like 15, 16, and it's like, wow, man, okay, what's that? That's a nice surprise, or something like that. It's like, wow, okay, that's beautiful.
Wow, you actually know that it's in 15, 16. I'm just like, what the hell is that?
No, yes, come on. I'll ask you about your compositions, but like I counted a lot on your tunes. I was like, hey, what is this? Like 31 structure on. Or like that one piece, I think Renko like writing down. I couldn't, and of course you have like John and Satoshi making it not really too easy because they're like masters of elasticity, right? Yeah, it's just like John. I play with him, and John is just like stupendous. I mean, amazing. But I just wanted to ask you about solo playing. How do you truly approach an improv? I mean, and how do you stand behind an improv? Like, do you sometimes when you do a solo gig, because like playing solo, like you said, at least for me, it's like playing chess with yourself, or it's really, I don't know, it's heavy, but how do you approach that limit of danger? There must be some danger involved to make the improvs really interesting. Do you approach it like that sometimes, the improvs, or?
Yeah, completely. I think so. For me, I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
That's what I mean about like really. How to put it? It's like I think you have to be. At least I have to have some sense of selflessness. When I'm playing solo.
Yeah.
Like I'm listening to the piece, I have to be surprised by it, and that's dangerous. And also, like, it's on you to make sure that the thing doesn't fall apart or loses energy or loses meaning. But it can lose energy by you putting too much energy into it. It has to me. It has to be kind of an energy of listening and paying attention and dropping into a form of hypnosis, actually. Yeah. And the materials have to have their own power. I think you're giving it up to whatever it is. If it's an interval or a sound, or if it's like the grain of a sound, like really like zeroing in on an attack, or whatever it is, whatever you're being aware of, wherever your awareness is going, that it's outside of you. Even if you're producing it, it has its own life. It has its own I almost want to say its own subjectivity, right? Its own directive force, and that's when the danger happens, because where does it want to go, and can I keep up with it? And so there are different. I remember one time I was kind of in trouble, because you can get in trouble in a solo gig. Suddenly you're like, fuck, it's it's not working.
Yeah.
It's not, which is a head judgment. What does that mean? It's not working, right? But just thinking that really puts you in trouble. Because then you start to feel like you have to fill up the space.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's when, in general, at least for me, that's when it goes down.
Yeah.
That's when the materials lose their value, because there's so. And the thing that helped me at that moment was suddenly imagining it as a film, where in a shot, like the great filmmakers who let time happen on screen, like a long take, like maniacally, like editing every moment. But just like if somebody's coming from the depth of field from very far away and is walking towards the camera, or the other way, you allow for that travel. That journey has its own meaning. That's how long it takes for a body to move, and things are happening in the sky above it, and maybe a car goes, whatever. There are other kinds of events, incidental events, but just that motion hasn't. So I started thinking, I just imagined that every shot, everything I was doing was like a camera movement, like a shot like this. Okay, let it happen, let it go all the way. And using the piano really helps, because you have this instant, the decay, right? I mean, you have that as a string player, right? Like there's, even though you're playing electric and you're challenging the natural decay of the sound, there, you're dealing with it, but still there's a thing, you have an attack, and then something is going to happen to that sound, right? And so that there's a great thing that Feldman says about the piano. He talks about a vanishing landscape.
Oh, wow.
In a way, like the piano is always involved with death, in a sense, There's always this thing of, it's a landscape that appears and then starts to disappear, and then there's another image that gets layered on top of it, and so. I don't know if that answers what you're saying, but that's kind of what I'm trying.
Because like.
And then if I'm not, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I mean. How you approach this, because if you get scared, sometimes, because me sometimes playing solo, and let's say I have more strings and I can play chords and everything, I still get, scared. Like, maybe I cannot allow a chord ring for 12 seconds. Of course you can. It's just your expectations, which, fuck it up, like, or.
But if you focus on the listening part, where you become a witness of the thing that's happening, of this event, and you get out of your own way, because you've already done all the work in your practice, in your composing, in your listening, you've done all the critical work. At that moment, if you're just there as a witness who just, just like pays attention to what's happening, I think that's all really that you need to do at that point. And doing this stuff with the electronics and doing with the piano, like then when I go and I play and there's none of that, there's no piano, there's no electronics, hopefully I'll have learned something from that about space, about the negative space, and listening for that, and allowing the piece to unfold, and just checking it out and being curious, staying curious and staying hungry and keeping the heat up,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Where do you think this, as I listen to your music, you seem to be like this curious mind, like also composition-wise and improvise, like when you play either, with improv gigs with Sean Conley and Tom Rainey, or whatever, your compositional. And I've read somewhere you were really inspired by Ornette also. And but I wanted to ask you about these early years of your jazz formation. How did this happen? I know you grew up partially in France also, and then you moved to Minneapolis. Like, how did this story happen musically, jazz-wise, especially for you?
Right, it was in Minneapolis. I think, a few things happened kind of in close succession.
Please.
I was 12. Okay, so I was 12 years old. I was at a friend's place. His father had a great vinyl collection with great, like, 70s covers and all that. And there was one that stuck out, which was Bitches Brew. And that somehow, I've always kind of read a lot, and I think I'd heard the name Miles Davis. There was something, and there was an aura around that name. And there's this album, and then that photo inside of him, and then just that very, and then inside, like, that short text by Ralph Gleason, something about the sound. I go, okay, can I borrow this? And I took it home, and I just started listening to it over and over. Just can be, and like what is, I listened to a lot of music, but I never heard obviously anything like that, because there's nothing like that. Yeah.
Wow.
And there's that whole opening section of Bitches Brew is just so incredible, like with nothing, right? I mean, talk about a negative space.
Yeah. Amazing.
The sound of the bass clarinet, when it comes in. And then at that time, I was also listening to Hendrix, and I think to me, I paired it with, if 6 was 9, that Hendrix tune.
Yeah, sure.
Where he starts talking like towards the end, there's like this breakdown, and he starts like that. That to me is like the sound of that Benny Maupin moment, like they started resonating, So there was that, and then, like I said, I was reading. I actually shoplifted a copy of Allen Ginsberg, Howl, and Kerouac. I got into like that stuff when I was a little bit later. I was 13, and then there are more names coming up. Charlie Parker, Lester Young. Lester Young's horn going from being like this to like, as the years go, more like that. So really curious, like what is that? And he talks about Charlie Parker being an influence on his idea of line and breath.
Yeah,
and there was this
really
incredible, prosody, right? Like this kind of revolution. So, and then I look and I see that Miles is on those recordings, and the big resource was the Minneapolis Public Library, like this amazing resource, So I'd get on my bicycle and go, and I'd get like 10 records, put them in my backpack and write back, and then I transfer them all to cassette. Yeah. It was all going to cassette because I didn't have money to buy records and all that. And I got a Charlie Parker. The first one, it was just by chance. It was the one that was there. It was the volume 3 of this Verve collection of Master of Modern Music. Yeah. But, and it's the session with Monk, where they're playing Oscar for Treadwell and Bloom Ditto and Mohawk, and there's that Monk intro. Like what? So that was a trip. Like I got super obsessed with that, and then somehow so really obsessed and listening more and more. And I had a little tape recorder and these cassettes, and when I would go to sleep at night, I would put the cassette and listen.
I did the same.
You did the same thing. And the thing about all that is like it was. It didn't occur to me that I could participate in that any more than reading anything else that I could be like, be on stage like directed by William Shakespeare in 1598 or something. It was as far until I heard Ornette. One of the records that I got, again because of the album cover, was Shape of Jazz to Come.
Shape of Jazz, yeah, man, that's like the Bible, yeah.
Right, you put it on, and there's the sound of Charlie Hayden's bass there, and the sound of his bass sounded like an oud, and the tuning sounded like North African music to me. And when Ornette and Don Cherry came in, their sense of unison sounded like stuff that I heard as a child, because my family is from Morocco, and my mother's family in the early 60s went to Israel. My father's family went to France. But my mother was always taking me. I was born in Israel actually, because she would always go there to be with her mother and her sisters, especially before I started going to school. So a lot of like my earliest like kind of sense memories are there in my grandmother's living room, and the music that was there and the flavor of things and all that. Anyway, when I heard Ornette's music, it was like all of that came up, and it felt like, Anyway, and so then one night I was listening to, so the listening was Lester Young and Billie Holiday, a lot of Billie Holiday, a lot of Miles, Bird, Monk, Coltrane, and Kind of Blue. And I know now there's like a backlash, like kind of, it's true, there are many other great records. But for me, it's true that Kind of Blue was like,
it is.
And I fell asleep. So the thing that would happen at night is that I would listen to music, and there would be a moment right before going to sleep where the horns started talking. And that's the moment I lived for, like where suddenly it would be like I would hear exact language coming out, like whether it was Miles or Coltrane or whoever it was. And so at first I would wake myself up to like write down, because what they were saying was amazing. But as soon as I would wake myself back into a normal state of wakefulness, all the words would disappear. They would just vanish.
Yeah.
And then I would get back into that state, and then they would start talking again. It was like synesthesia, except it was linguistic,
Yeah.
It was like word. It was word. And that was incredible, And so one night I fell asleep with that, and I dreamt that I was on a bus with a bunch of musicians, and and they were like, and they were hanging and they were playing, and they were like, hey, you want to play? Do you play? And I go, no, I don't play it. And he goes, no, man. And he gives me this little box, and in the box there's a tiny saxophone, like this big. And he says, no, go ahead, play it. And I start to blow in it, and suddenly the horn just like, it turns into a real saxophone, and it's the best feeling I've ever experienced. And I wake up feeling like my solar plexus has exploded, and it's like open to the sky. It's just huge, and I'm like, it was incredible feeling. It was like kind of how people describe a religious conversion or something. It was really amazing. And I was 14 at that time, and I had this really lovely girlfriend who was, I told her, I said, and she's like, really? Okay, we're going to get you a horn or something. And I figured out how to rent a saxophone. She was like, she wanted to
play the horn yet.
No, I didn't.
Ah, wow, okay.
Yeah, that's how I started playing.
Wow,
I played violin. In Paris, I played violin as a child. I went to the conservatory, for like a couple of years. But then I stopped, and I never played an instrument until then,
Man.
So that's, sorry, long answer.
No, please, that's man, you should write this down. That's like it's like a poem, what you described. Like, it's really, it's a nice, it's like a nice surrealistic story or something. So.
But it's really why, I'm so fortunate, I'm so grateful for that, because that kind of set the tone of what, for me, like my personal relationship to music would be, which wasn't like that to be the most natural thing for me to do. There were other things that seemed more natural, but maybe part of it was to challenge nature, challenge what was, so.
But you stayed then in Minneapolis. How did you learn with regarding the jazz language? How did that story begin? Like you learning it?
So I was in Minneapolis. I started taking lessons. There was great. I was so, I went to a theater school actually. That was where you had your academic classes in the morning. It was a conservatory school. You had your academics in the morning and then theater stuff in the afternoon. I did that for a year. It was the Children's Theater of Minneapolis. That's a whole thing in itself. But and it was during that year that I started playing saxophone, and I became completely like obsessed. Just like hours and hours every day, like really, like also feeling like it was late. Like I was 14, going 15. Like it seemed like it was hugely late. Like I was behind. So I had to catch up. And there were some great artists, great musicians at this school, and I asked the pianist, who was the accompanist for the dance classes and the theater stuff, do you know a saxophone player I can take lessons from? And he said, yeah, there's this guy, and that was Pat Moriarty, who's I was just, I think about, he passed away last year during this pandemic, so I think about him even more now all the time. But he became a real mentor, but it only lasted like 2 years, because then I left Minneapolis. When I left high school when I was 16. I graduated when I was 16, and then I split. I just wanted to get out of there. But now, always my big regret is that I didn't stay a little bit longer to continue study with him. But he was kind of, I came and he was like, okay, so what are you into? And I started saying, Ornette, Coltrane, and he was like, wow, and he tripped, and so he would give me records every week. More vinyl to take home, and he turned me on to so much stuff, to Weber, Steve Lacy, Frank Lowe, Albert Eiler, like Dolphy, but also like when I was already into Bird and all that. Lee Konitz, I think my first Lee Konitz record, even though that wasn't really one of his guys, he thought, well, maybe I would be interested, and of course that really totally blew me away. He was great and great interest. Like when I would make a squeak or do like some messed up sound on the horn, he'd be like, and then he'd like figure out how to reproduce, So he like also, and this kind of he didn't say a lot, he just kind of like gentle little things, giving me records, and then by example, and his sound was just like this extraordinary sound, just being next to him and playing, but he only gave me like classical stuff to work on.
Oh, wow.
He would give me like others, like he, when I would ask him about changes and stuff like that, he would be like, he would give me a recording to check out, or just like a few little things here and there. Otherwise, he really let me kind of figure stuff out on my own. He would just say, listen to the notes that change.
Yeah,
you know,
smart.
like what are the common tones, and just listen to where the notes are changed. He'd be like, listen to Dexter Gordon. Like that was his big thing. Was like because Dexter, you know, like just his approach to playing changes is so personal, and it really has a lot to do with these kind of a simple idea, you know, like that. I'm really even, and now all of that is coming back a lot. Like whenever I have a chance to meet like an older musician or somebody who played with like the older, he's like, how did they talk about it? Like prior to jazz school, how did people talk about this? You know, like I heard an interesting thing the other day with somebody who played with Kenny Durham, saying that that Kenny Durham would say, find the harmonic trail. Like in learning a tune, even if like you're learning it on the bandstand, what is the diminished trail? Find the diminished trail. I think, wow, just that one idea is like, there's so much there to do, you know, with that. If you really, because it's like older cats, like everybody had their own, you know, rhythm changes wasn't like one thing. It was like Coltrane's rhythm changes or Lester Young's. Everybody like invented a new idea of what that was, you know, for themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is, I think, there's a lot of homogenization going on, like, you know, through education and all that, like where it's, which is cool. I don't want to knock it, but for me, it was like but in all of that, it's like basically I'm much more self-taught, which means that you find out, you learn by asking questions from a lot of different people and a lot of different sources, and sometimes it means that you lose a lot of time, you know, on certain things. Like certain basic things come later, like things don't come in order according to your curriculum. Sure. They just come, you know, they come when you need them. You know, so.
I know what you mean. I mean, jazz, I'm also self-taught, you know, so you know, I started with Ornette, and I think I transcribed all Ornette solos on the Complete Atlantic, you know, that 6 CD set.
Really? The beauty is a rare thing? Really?
Yeah, I did like.
Wow.
And I didn't know what you know. I knew the changes, but I just transcribed stuff because I like the melodicism of Ornette, you know. And it's.
And you played it, and you played it.
And I played it. I tried to play it. You know, I came some tunes like up to 70%, but you know, I put down everything on paper, and this was, you know, how to learn it. And I didn't know maybe about changes, but then I learned about changes and stuff later. But just to get the idea of Ornette, you know, like this melodic approach to playing, I love that. So yeah, I know it's for you.
Why? Let me ask you a question. I mean, I've always been curious about this, and I think Ornette said something about some connection of the alto saxophone to the guitar, but that there's a real sense in which the guitar is like, I mean, it's a very powerful force in Ornette's music. Later in prime time, you know, like that really becomes.
Yeah.
But even when I think of like people who play, you know, like my favorite Matheny is him playing playing with Ornette, and also when he's covering those tunes.
The best record.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, but also like on whatever, where he's playing Humpty Dumpty, and there's one where he's playing Round Trip, I think. Yeah. He plays them like there's something about the melodic flow that, and the sound of it. There's some connection, no? Do you feel that?
I don't know. I felt really natural when transcribing that, because it's so, you know, Coltrane for me was way heavier just because of the runs that he does, you know, like it's just, well, Ornette's playing for me, it's just like, it's so, I don't know, maybe it is some sense that it's like easy to play on guitar also because it's so melodic, it makes sense in a way. Even though it's without harmony in a sense, but there is harmony in his own.
I think there's harmony.
Yeah, of course.
To me, there's total harmony.
Yeah, for me.
It's just there's not a preset harmonic framework, but there's harmony.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's happening. I mean, especially with Charlie Hayden. I mean, the counterpoint is incredible, and also the way the triads, especially to me, like the Ornette that I love all that Atlantic stuff, but more and more, like to me, it's like the late '60s, the band with Dewey and Charlie and Blackwell. Like around Science Fiction time and all those bootlegs from that period.
Yeah.
That's some of the heaviest music, like for me, because it's like he really broke free of the AABA form and doing just the song. You know, it's so purified, and it's like a kind of the way the triads functions, almost like let's think of it like it's very connected to Cubism in my mind.
Yeah.
You know, seeing the same thing from different angles. You know, like a tune like Broken Shadows, how the pivot points, like, is that no part of this triad or is it part of this? You know, it's these simple elements that he does these completely extraordinarily beautiful new things with, you know, like, and also like that the angle, like the different angles and the different pivoting notes uncover new landscape. Like it's like the landscape is coming out of the pen. That's you know what I mean. Like it's
sure.
It's simultaneous with it. It's so deep. So
such a genius, really. I mean, people talk about Coltrane, of course, and Miles, but I think we're always forgetting about Ornette and Eric Dolphy. Yeah, I'm really into Dolphy now, and it's just like if you listen also to Dolphy's impros, it's just man.
Yeah, Dolphy's amazing. Yeah,
all these guys, just Albert Eiler, all these guys, so underrated in a way. But yeah. But one guy I also saw you mentioned a lot is Anthony Braxton. Speaking of all these amazing players, and I've read somewhere you guys have some sort of a special connection that you played gigs also with him, and you were a student of his also, right?
I wanted to be, but he wouldn't. No, I mean he did. I mean, okay. He's the reason I moved back, because I had so I left Minneapolis when I was 17, and then I traveled for a year. I went to NYU for 1 year and dropped out. It was a disaster. It was really a total disaster. And then for several years I was basically homeless. I was going back and forth between Europe. Here I went like I did this cross-country trip that took 8 months through the US, sleeping outside and living in a van for a while, a lot of adventures. And anyway, not to go through the whole thing, but I had moved back to France, and it was what my parents had in the meantime had moved to Hartford, Connecticut, and I was visiting them one summer. I guess I was 23, something around there, and I found out that Anthony Braxton had started teaching at Middletown through a friend somebody who had played in my teacher's group in Minneapolis. So I had spoken to my teacher on the phone, Pat, and he said, "Oh, Robert Rumble is this great trumpet player. He's going to Wesleyan now. He's at Wesleyan. He's doing his PhD there on Ghanaian brass bands." So I called him, and he says, "Oh man, who's teaching here is Anthony Braxton. Why don't you come down and sit in on one of in class?" I was like, "Really? I can?" He's like, "Yeah." So I showed up with my horn and sat and Anthony was amazing. He had like the music that he'd recorded, like these big orchestra pieces, just handed out to all these students, many of whom had never heard of him or knew nothing about him. And then he just had them play this music, and I sat down and played, and I'd never seen 5/2s and 17/3, all these kind of crazy tuplets and things, and it was barely hanging together, and I was like, ah! And suddenly he stops and he goes, "And who are you?" And I'm like thinking, God, I just completely messed it up. And it was that kind of he says, "You sound wonderful." He was over the top kind, and afterwards I stayed with him and talked I think he stayed with me for 2.5. I don't want to exaggerate because the reality is so exaggerated. It was almost 3 hours or something. It was my impression of it. At least 2 hours of just talking about music, and then he says, "Why are you living over there? Come back. We need musicians like you back in America, sir." Like that. I mean, it was completely undeserved, except that I was open, and I had, maybe he saw that, just how open and enthusiastic and into the music I was, and so based on that conversation, I went back to Paris, where things were kind of starting to happen for me. I was in a band that was making its first record. It's the first record I'm on. I had a girlfriend and an apartment, and apartment of sorts, and I split. I said, okay, I'm just spending a few months, and I moved to Middletown, Connecticut, a few months later. That was in the spring, so I think the next January I just showed up. I rented in a room in this apartment that was owned by the Mott family in Middletown, because there's a big mafia presence in Middletown, Connecticut. The Mizzata brothers. Mizzata brothers. That was a trip. Anyway, and then I showed up and he didn't recognize me, and I freaked out. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Because I had a beard, or I didn't have a beard, and one of the, I can't remember which it was, but there was a difference in my face between the two, And I said, "I'm here," and he's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then when I said, "Well, could I sit in on your ensemble class?" And he says, "Okay." For some reason, I think he was in a little. Anyway, and I go and I sit in, and we start playing, and suddenly he stops again. He goes, "I remember you,"
Okay.
And then it was beautiful. He was so kind, He just was like, I was like, so I came back, I want to study with you. He said, no, we're going to do projects. Too bad you weren't here 2 weeks ago. I would have had you on this record, that coming out, that had was going to come out on Black Saint. That's how he was, Wow. I'm sure.
Yes,
I mean, he's retired from teaching now, but just this tremendous just generosity and he really brings out the things in you that you didn't know you had. So then I started playing in his ensemble there, and when I moved to New York the following year, I think that my first month's rent moving to New York, I moved the following January. I got a call from his agent to go play a duo concert with him in Belgium.
Serious? Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, and the agent was like, yeah, I don't know who you are. The festival named all these other people. He says, no, I wanted to. I think he just wanted, and I think he just wanted kind of to help me out. Part of it was helping out, like, his sense of like some kind of, helping young musicians. And so we did that duo gig, and it was an incredible experience. And I played quartet with him where he was playing piano. We did like a weekly thing for a while, and then his orchestra stuff, and it lasted till about for like the first 2 years that I lived in New York, and then it ended kind of abruptly, and that was that. But I mean, beautiful. I saw him a couple of years ago. I guess I went to New Haven to hear him. I hadn't heard him in a long time or seen him in a long time, and it was like coming home, just to be in his presence, and I learned so much from him,
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's so beautiful. Like, you mentioned New York, moving to New York, I guess mid-90s, right?
Yeah.
And how was that move for you, like in the beginning? I mean, I know you played a lot with Anthony Coleman. I have, I think, 2 records of Anthony, like Self-Haters and that one, that Abysmal Richness.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow, you have, yeah.
I don't know, the Abysmal Richness or blah, 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 the long title. But how were the beginning years for you in New York? Like, how did you settle into the scene, and how did that process go?
It was, wow, I still had that connection to Anthony Braxton, going to Middletown like sometimes once a week, for a certain period. Through him, I met some people in New York, like an early person that I met who's still like a close friend. We just talked on the phone a couple of days ago. Is Fred Lomberg-Holm, the cellist.
Yeah. Oh, really? I didn't know that. Wow, that's beautiful.
And Fred is the person
Fred
who
plays in Self-Haters. Yeah, exactly.
Right. He introduced me to Anthony. Anthony was looking for, at that time, Doug Wieselman, the clarinetist, had moved to California, and so I even play clarinet. I mean, the only recorded instance of me playing clarinet is on Anthony, that first record of the Self-Haters. And Fred was, became like a mentor. Like that's the thing about being self-taught, is that you end up having a lot of mentors. Like there's a lot of different people who may seem very, very different from each other. Like at that time, Fred had like, meeting him was wow. I mean, because he's kind of tough, and he has really strong ideas about what's good, what's not, what's real. Strong ideas about specificity and improvisation, amazing, very challenging, great player. And I was he had a band called Peep that I became part of, and so then that was the period, like the first. I played at the Knitting Factory, the first Knitting Factory, the one that was on Houston. Right as it was closing, right before they moved to Leonard Street to Tribeca. And remember that first gig was a Self-Haters gig. There was Rebo and Zorn and Elliot Sharp in the audience. There were all these people,
Wow.
And it was a certain world, that particular world was I mean, Anthony, huge influence too, also a mentor for me, also still a close friend. Like everything that I thought that I knew, like, or that I thought that I had gotten into, none of it prepared me for Anthony's music. Like he almost didn't care about any of those things. Yeah, he cared about things that I'd never thought about and that were really important. In terms of form, he was really like into stripping things down. Still is, to really stripping them down to gestures and understanding the unfolding of a piece in a really different way. it's still in a way, it's like super familiar, super deep inside of me, and also completely foreign, like, goes against my tendencies in a good way. I think it's good in general. I think it's really important to constantly be confronted with the opposite of yourself. And to find out how can that be included in who you are in your music, rather than just following the bent of where it is. And I can hear it in people's music sometimes that they haven't had to confront the demon or something, the negative. The negative, just like that really kicks your ass and stretches you and is kind of uncomfortable. And I mean, playing in Self-Haters was literally uncomfortable. Like, I would play alto and baritone, and the baritone the rule was that I could never have the baritone around my neck, so I could only play it squatting with it on its stand, which was really hard on the knees, Like, there were these things. It was like it was being in a Beckett play. That was a big model for was Beckett, so it was being a character in Endgame with all these restrictions and what comes out at that moment. And for it to not be arty at all, like this deep artistic sensibility, but like a real mistrust of artsiness of anything. Sound and an incredible awareness of sound that he has.
That's beautiful.
So that was that, and then at the same time, I was living with in the East Village, at a place on 11th Street between B and C, which is still really a funky neighborhood. With this drummer named Gérard Ferrou, whose drums had belonged to Ed Blackwell, and who had been really like a disciple and very close to Blackwell, like for like the last 13 or 14 years of Blackwell's life, and took care of him, helped him go to dialysis, took care of his drums, and had like these practice pads with Blackwell's exercises like written on them. And on the snare, and I went there for a session, and I met Chris Lightcap, the bass player, whom I'd heard at Wesley, who had come to Wesleyan with Gérard and a pianist named Dave Shields, and they'd come to Wesleyan, and I had seen a concert with them, and then I don't even remember how all of this happened, but I ended up playing a session at Gérard's, and Chris was playing, and he sounded so great, And I had a friend, a really close friend from Paris, an Israeli drummer named Igal Foni. So, and who'd been like in Paris, like he'd been the first drummer that I could play my music with, that I was writing for, and he was an amazing drummer, so talented and gifted. And he came to visit me in New York, and I got him together with Chris. Anyway, that became kind of the core of my first band as a leader. Which later became a sextet. But at first it was a trio. It was a collective trio called Neptune 66, and we did a tour in Israel that Igal organized with a clarinetist who's passed away now, named Harold Rubin. And we did that, and then Igal moved to New York, and that's when I, writing for that group and playing, and that's around like 96 or something. And again, getting my ass kicked. I mean, they were way better musicians than me.
This was your first experience as a band leader then, or did you?
No, in New York. I had done stuff in Paris.
I
was writing, actually I did a first record in Paris that came out, strangely enough, on an Igal Foni record where he combined two sideman sessions, and it's on it was like with three saxophones, bass and drums, and I was writing all the time. It was a certain way of writing that I couldn't even do now. But it was very natural. Like I would just sit down in a coffee shop and write like a sextet tune.
How do you approach writing, by the way? I mean, what's your?
Well, that's changed. I'm way more. I've lost some of that thing. Braxton said this amazing thing to me when I think I was 23 or 24, and. He said, it's not about he says, what you can do now, you won't be able to do in 10 years. And what you'll be able to do in 10 years, you can't do now, but neither one invalidates the other.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
He was really document, and I have obviously not documented anywhere close to the amount that I mean, it's amazing, how much music. But still, that idea that it's not about the golden, what he says, it's not about the golden CD. It's about committing to a life as a creative artist, and honoring every step of that, and all the transformations and all of that. So
But do you like? I mean, I know you probably write for bands, right? I mean, like, I don't know. I love the Quartet for Clean Feet, the Nerve Dance. That's, the compositions there are amazing, man. But like, it's I struggle with them so much, so much. I'm a musician. That's a bad thing, and a composer, because I just start thinking about what's behind the music. So that's really. I wish I didn't have it, but.
No, that's your curiosity. That's your curiosity, right?
Yeah, but you know what I mean. If I go to a gallery, I'm not a painter. I enjoy the painting or poetry, as a human being. I don't know, an outside. Right. But like, listening to music, I'm always like, wait, what is happening rhythmically? What's harmonically? And I wanted to ask you, how do you approach compositions like, I don't know, Darknet on Nerve Dance, which, like, how do you write a tune like that? Or like Renku on Renku, which I figured out was 31, at least structured. But
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, but how do you do these things? How do you write a composition like that? Like,
well, those two tunes have a similar kind of origin in that they were like, there's the tunes that you write that are kind of like what if this and that, like it's almost like you're inventing a musical theory for one particular piece, and it's that piece is going to exhaust that theory, like you'll never use it again. There's a thing I love in when you talk about the troubadours, all the different schools of that the troubadours would have these incredibly complex stanza forms, with, it's not like like a 17-line poem stanza form that repeats like 8 times, in which there are like 36 different kinds of rhyme, like not just the end of the line rhyme, but a rhyme inside, and then different kinds of assonances and different kinds of each line is a different number of syllables, right? And that structure then gets repeated somehow, and while you're telling a story, or while you're singing the praises of the birds and the spring, and you're paying homage to that, or to your lover, like all of that, while doing that and making it feel effortless, and also that you don't have to be counting the 36 rhymes or counting the syllables.
Yeah, sure.
They're there. It's like a bird song. There's something that's informing the world. A tree, a bird, like anything. That there's math in that, right?
Yeah.
But the math has become embodied, and it's become flesh and matter and movement and motion and all.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was kind of always like a model for me, like in the idea of writing music, So it's very specific things, like in Renku. Why does it come out to 31? Is because, well, do you know what a Renku is?
Yeah, I mean, I know what. Yeah. It's like based on haiku, and then
Right. So it's collaborative, first of all. So a Renku is a form where it's there's a haiku, which as you know is 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. 5, 7, 5, and then there's a linking 2 lines of 7 syllables each that connect to the next section. And then poets would trade, like on a theme. They would improvise a haiku, have the 2 lines of 7, and the next person. So there's this sense of like, and when you think about like a poem, you're thinking about rhythms, syllables, things that are weightless, intangible, but that also govern your breath. Your breathing. You're breathing in rhythm to this, and it probably changes your heartbeat. It's a physical experience, right? And it's also registering an illumination. Haiku is this moment of like a revelation of something maybe very simple, and it's embodied in the very structure, in the numbers, right, of the syllable. That somehow that whole structure is encoding and registering an experience that's physical, spiritual, psychological state, and at the same time completely unpretentious.
Yeah.
And then you pass it to the next person. So anyway, so I started thinking about 5-7-5-7-7 as not just like a cerebral thing, but as all of that. And so I started making a piece out of that. And then it's something I've always, especially at that time, I was always thinking about is like those proportions, that rhythm, those rhythmic proportions, that they can happen on different scales. So they can happen on the level of the 8th note, and then they can happen on the level of the quarter note, and then they can happen on the number of bars.
too. Wow, okay.
You know, so that all of those, right? So you're layering all of those rhythms. You know, it's like having inside of a 7, you have, you know, there are every rhythmic level is being governed by the way that particular 7 exists. Whether it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if like you're doing a tune where like you think of it, it's in 7. And so say it's 2-3-2. Okay, so that's your 7. That the rhythmic stuff that's happening in the quarter note is 2-3-2. On the 8th note, it's 2-3-2. But then you also have some kind of rhythm of an idea that's 2 bars, a different idea that's 3 bars, an idea that's 2 bars, and that the whole thing is that. You know, for example, so how do you keep all of these different levels going, and what's happening at every given moment at the intersection of all these different?
Yeah, that's incredible, man. Wow.
And then I think 5-7-5. So I'm thinking fifths and different kinds of 7ths, and then 5ths and 7ths have a way of harmonically making color disappear, right? They're like, I guess,
openness in a way.
Yeah. So then I wanted color. I wanted juice. So I started mixing in 3rds and 6ths, and that's how the harmonic material kind of.
Wow.
So that's how the 31. That's how the 31 is going on.
That's amazing.
That's how. Like if you check out the thing.
Yeah. How are you then?
But I wanted to sing, right? I wanted to sing.
Yeah. I mean,
the whole thing is like, how do you get all of that stuff to sing? Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I wanted to ask you. Like when I listen to you improvise, you know, with those 2 guys or with the quartet, you make it seem so effortless. But you know, there's so much happening on the bottom rhythmically. You know, with all these amazing musicians you have in the band, and how do you make yourself comfortable playing over these structures then?
Well, thanks for saying that it sounds comfortable. I mean,
it sounds so easy when you know it's. I know it's like listening to Foni, you know, Malaby or someone like that. It's just like you listen to that and you're like, man, it sounds so.
He's amazing. I mean, Tony. Yeah, I mean, Tony, Hebert, Nasheet, Satoshi, they all have it in common. This thing that even though I think part of it is that they just have amazing time.
Yeah.
Just time and a sense of tension and release, so that it's not about like the grid, even though there's a grid
sure.
that's there. It's about really making these things like experiential and feeling the weights, feeling the balance. It's like a constant rebalancing of that. So you're not counting, you know.
What you said, elasticity, right before.
Yeah. So you're not counting, you know, and there's a lot of forgiveness. Hebert, you know, and Hebert knows me. You know, I mean, Satoshi is such a underrated. I mean, that's kind of a cliche to say, but what a master, you know. I mean, my joke when I met him is like, you know, you could take like a bucket of like full of rocks and throw it down the stairs, and he would hear it, and he could play it, and he could play it in a meter, and it would sound, and without taking away any of its wildness, and it would sound completely natural. He's very in tune. I think all of them are with the way that sounds naturally happen.
Yeah. How did you hook up with John, by the way? He's like your mainstay, and Satoshi also. Like, when was Renko formed? Like the trio, actually.
The trio is in 2004, I believe.
Oh, already.
3 or 4.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. So we've only made 3 records as a trio.
But still, amazing.
Yeah, but it's kind of the heart, I think, of what I do. It's almost like, I mean, John's, you know, during the pandemic, he got a job in Michigan, so we don't see each other very much. We played 1 gig last year. It was my first gig, like a streaming gig from Barbès that I loved. I mean, it was wonderful. It was like it was so moving, you know. I mean, they're brothers. I met both of them as I met John as a sideman in a band of a musician named Edward Ratliff.
Oh yeah. Sure.
It was in his group too that I met Sean Conley, actually. Sean I met elsewhere. Sorry, that's true. But Sean did play in that group. Sean I heard with Igal, that drummer that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Who's on Credo, actually. Yeah. So I met them at that time. It was after Credo, and my writing was changing, and I just had this idea for a trio that John and Satoshi would sound great together. Satoshi had been playing in my sextet. And it was like too much writing in a way, like it was, or too much of a certain kind of writing that I needed to break out of, you know?
Yeah.
I just felt, and also my playing, I felt like I was I needed to focus on being able to play. Like my compositional thing was ahead, was more developed in a way than my ability to play and express things in real time. And so I called him to do a gig at Barbès, the first year that I started booking there, and no rehearsal. And I wrote a tune on the way to the gig, on the train, where I write a lot of music. I used to write a lot of tunes before the pandemic. A lot of tunes were written on trains, on the subway. Somehow, like that. It's a very creative space, especially during rush hour. There's something about the adversity of it. Yeah, seriously. There's something about the adversity of that. Yeah, there's a whole series of tunes that are on records that something about an orchestra piece. A lot of it was written, was prepared at least on the train. I think it's because like you're on a train, you always have to be really aware of your environment. You can't completely lose yourself. And then, there's a great line of Kafka in his journal. He says, "God doesn't want me to write, but I must."
Oh, that's
It's like that. The train doesn't. Nobody on the train wants it. It's adversity. So in a way, it externalizes like the inner, all the demons that are stopping you from writing, and the paranoia. Paranoia sharpens your senses, and so you become. It's just like, oh yeah, okay, this idea. It's a little nuts, but it worked for me. But anyway, so I wrote it on the way there, and then we played it, and they play in a way like where's the beat? They know they're grooving.
Yeah,
they know where they're falling together. Like it was just amazing. It was like, how the hell do they do that? Yeah. And it felt amazing and scary and there was no talking about the music, and for years there was no talking about the music for years, and that was amazing. Like Satoshi and I, one day Satoshi and I had a conversation about music, but it was like 10 years into our working together or something, and it was like, wow, okay, good, and that was great. In a way, it was great because I can talk. Obviously, I'm talking a lot right now. I can talk, but talking sometimes is a way of covering up stuff. Like, can you play?
Yeah, sure.
You can talk. Sure. Can you make it happen right now, like this? No rehearsal. Can you communicate? On this level.
Yeah.
And so like that, and so then that became the thing, and I love those guys. I miss them. And and they could read all that stuff, and at the same time you could feel like really amazing and challenge it, and I could get lost and they could get lost. Well, Satoshi never gets lost, and Hebert has to make an effort to get lost, but he can.
I think so too.
That Dave Liebman line, if you don't get lost once a night, you're not trying hard enough.
Oh yeah, sure.
Also, there's a thing about getting lost on the form is that suddenly things would happen. Like I would hear recordings of myself. Yeah, where I'm lost and suddenly I'm playing way better.
Yeah.
Playing way better than when I think I'm. Like suddenly it's like, so.
Yeah, getting lost. I remember years ago I did a gig and I had a tour with Drew Grass and Tom Rainey, and I wrote this complex compositions like 6, 5, 7, like the form was like that, and on paper when I. The idea was like to play the hat, which was like 2 minutes. Of course, they did it. And then I wanted to go into open blow. And I was like, yeah, that's easy, And then they suggested, like, why don't we play on the form? I remember the first gig, I was lost in bar 6 because, they knew where they were immediately. I was just like, man, okay. So that's Rainey's another total. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Tom, that trio with Sean also. Like, how does playing in that trio differ for you with playing with John and Satoshi? Tom for me is like one of the most underrated players ever on drums. Like,
oh my God! He's such a genius. Well, we had Sean and Tom are the rhythm section with Matt Mitchell of a record that I did in 2012.
Yeah.
Called Spun. And they. So we had time to really evolve, like playing together. I don't know if Sean and Tom had played that much before. I think that was really like the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that they really like worked in a project together, and they really. Sean loved Tom, and Tom loved Sean. It was a great hookup and very different. They're different because it's different people. It's like you have different conversations with different people. But there was time for it to evolve, and also like with John and Satoshi, I'm really like into this thing that when you have a band that like the material is varied, not only sounds different but is made differently. Yeah. So that you have something like for me like Raincoat where it's really hard, like the bass line is bitch, like it's very challenging, and then you have a piece that's like where there's hardly any information, and then where you're developing all these different muscles, so that you're not only accenting only one kind of muscle which gets really big and then the rest of the body gets atrophied. Like I think balance is really important, so that you have stuff where and that comes, actually when I think about it, that really comes from the experience of playing with Braxton's music, because you're in a state of like where you're counting, you're improvising, you're interpreting, drawings, shapes. You're playing often like a part that's not written for your instrument. So you have to be, while you're reading it, you have to be figuring out like, how do I do that? Where do I play this note that's outside of my range? Sometimes things get really messed up, like, like the band is in a different place than the conductor, or, so how do you negotiate that? So the idea that pretty soon there's no distinction between improvising and reading. Sometimes improvisation is counted. Okay, I play for 7 beats, then I read this crazy thing, and then I interpret this shape, and then suddenly I'm in an open space. There's a big fermata, and I'm, so after a while it becomes like a trance. And I think that's the goal for Anthony. And I think a lot of people don't get that when they play his music. They think, well, everybody's lost, or people are not really playing what's written, or or it's impossible, but that's not. The point is that I think he's going towards something it's not a Eurocentric concept of music. It comes from somewhere else. It comes from the idea of music as ritual, and performing a piece of music is a ritual that the goal of which is to attain trance, total perception. And suddenly, again, like I said, you do things that you didn't know that you were able to do, that in other circumstances you wouldn't be able to do. Like people do, like the Saint Trance ceremony. Suddenly they're walking in fire, or having incredible, like when I did that duo gig with Anthony, it was amazing. Like he gave me this music to play like 10 minutes before we go to the gig. Pages and pages of 2 alto unison stuff.
You actually played music? Wow! I thought it was improvised gig. Wow, shit, man.
No. And it was and suddenly my fingers, I was playing like that for like 10 minutes. And I don't know how I did it. I've looked at that chart since. I'm like, how the hell? But it was his gravity. Yeah. First of all, his rhythmic gravity, his sense of just like the beat, and then filling that beat with all of these gestures. Yeah. And my fingers were being pulled. It was like being a marionette. They were just being pulled into place by that energy, by that moment, So I think that's a thing that's like a model somewhere for me, like that inside of a band, you want to get the irrational and the rational and all of these things like firing, I don't Braxton's a master at that, I don't pretend to come close to that, but that's the goal. But when you play, but with Rainey, Sean, all of these, they're like bats, they have ears like this. They just sense the 360-degree awareness, and also great time, like great sense of pulse and large beats, tension and release, balance, so. So, but they're different bodies, right? Like Tom is like, he's like the Buster Keaton of the drums, you watch Buster Keaton like doing these impossible things, but like totally deadpan. Watch like Rainey with all his limbs like going, like every single limb like in a different kind of
like a deadpan bass, like
just like that in total focus.
Incredible.
And it's so natural, right? Like it's so natural what he does. So when we got to do you're talking about that Sean Trio thing that
like that Live at Bushwick series I listened to the other day. It's just like, man, it's such a...
I was like, so we just fell into that world. Like, I've been thinking about, I don't know if I'm sure you experienced this as a musician, like the challenge of playing music to me is like being able to drop as quickly as possible into a state of hypnosis. Like something that's like hypnosis, where you just hear, you really hear. I was thinking, because the other day there's a park close to me. It's really like the Hood. It's actually called the Hood Park. It's really big, and there's the George Washington Bridge behind. There's a lot of sky. It's like behind you have the river, so there's this big opening. There's some soccer. There's like a small kind of soccer field with a wall that the ball bounces against, and you can sit on top of this kind of rock, there in the middle of it. There are people listening to music, like boom boxes, and there's car traffic. Anyway, you just sit there. It's 360-degree surround experience of sound, and I remember like it took me a few minutes, and suddenly I was there. Like I was sitting, and I was hearing like the reverberation of the soccer balls, like these bass notes over here, this kind of treble. Then there were birds because it's spring over here, and everything was happening according to its own time, its own zone. And I was hearing it, but it took a while to get there. And when you play music, that's where you want to get to. You want that note, that color to be full in its meaning and its richness.
Yeah.
Rainey, Satoshi, Hebert, Malaby, all of them, they can do that. They just drop into
that. Yeah.
It's like boom, hypnosis. You're in it. You're in it now.
Yeah. How to do that? That's I did like before the pandemic a trio tour with Tony with Malaby. We did like I think 12 gigs in Europe.
Wow.
In trio, like guitar, Tony, and an Italian drummer, and
great.
Tony played like what you said. Like, for me that was like university PhD improvising level of learning. I mean, I played with Tony before, but this tour, because we played every night, it's just we played every night so different. It was just and I asked him like, how do you do that? And it was just I don't know, just listen, man. That was like listen, Samo, like just he always closes his eyes and that's it. It's.
In other words, listen not just when you're playing, but listen also when you're walking down the street.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
How you live,
Yeah.
It's really like something about a way of being aware and listening and having a sense of, big arcs. Gerald. I mean, it's so gifted this moment. Like I'm hearing a set of Gerald Cleaver one.
Yeah, Gerald is also like a genius.
Where it was like, wow, that he played one arc. The whole set was one arc. They were going through different pieces. It was so beautiful. It's like it was present. It wasn't calculated.
Yeah.
It was, it's not about that. It's not about like, oh, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do 10 minutes from now. But it's more like I'm so tuned in to this present moment and to letting it organically develop that the 10 minutes from now is already included. Like you can say that like in a small seed, the entire tree is included, is there. It's just folded in very small inside of the seed, and then it just goes, that was...
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's actually what Gerald said. Like I did like a talk with him like that with Gerald like a month ago, and it's just he's talked about the same kind of idea of this, just like seeing this wider picture, the story, and like like he described it how he sees like music in such different levels of not about just rhythm and harmony, but just like general the space, how to feel it, and and then you listen to his playing, and it's like
It's also like how do things that are not music enter?
Yeah, exactly.
How much of that, flavors, smells. I got to work with, a big learning thing for me has been working with theater people, working on shows with, when you like great theater people, like amazing, great director Robert Woodruff and great actor Bill Camp. I mean, they're masters, they're like Gerald or Rainey or Mel, they're, and something about those experiences, that's where I got into doing a lot of electronics, because I was doing live scores for these shows. Also a sense of form, because like the show can be 2 hours long, so you're thinking about a 2-hour piece. That's a long, that includes even the language, even the text, all the, where I was doing sound design too. So like all the sounds that you're hearing, the spatialization of the sound, how all of that is coming out of a text.
Yeah.
How all of that has a rhythm and shape and there's the thing like, why does this sound with that word and that light and that color of of costume, why suddenly does it work, does it do something that's more than the sum of its parts? You can't say what it is, but you know when it's happening and you know when it's not. And then if you're working with like I had the good fortune to be able to work with these people who are so aware of all of that. Like working with Bill, I was, we're doing this show, we did it 80 times in 1 year, like in 3 different cities. So I got to really know his rhythms, and even though there was a lot of stuff that was preset, like when is he going to do this, and getting into that sense of timing, it was like playing with a great drummer.
Like
and
music,
and Robert had this great line that he said, the director, he said, don't, when I would do the sound cue, like, nah, like it was too on the nose, like that's like putting a hat on a hat. And he said, like, do it too soon or too late. In other words, make the event have flavor, have it inflect the moment, time. So if somebody tells you to do something too soon or too late, that means that it presupposes that you know where the natural or the normal place would be, right?
Yeah.
And then rush it or delay it.
Yeah.
You know, that thing, like to get into that, so that time, instead of being just like a small point, becomes huge. I had that working with motion, you know, playing with motion.
I wanted to ask you about Paul. Like, you know, I've spoken with Lauren the other day, Stillman, who was sharing kind of that same week, I think you guys did. But how was it? You know, we're talking about all these amazing drummers and musicians about time and elasticity. And Paul is, I think, there in his own way, like also composition-wise. How was it like for you with Paul, this experience? How did that thing happen, actually?
Well, the first time I got to play with him was in the band of Masabumi Kikuchi and Teru Masahino.
Oh, okay.
They did it, because it was for Sony Jazz in Japan, Sony Japan. For that label, they wanted to do like celebrate the 40th anniversary of their first record, which had been, I guess. So we did this record in 2007, so it was 1967, right?
Wow.
So that's how I met Paul, because he was the drummer on that. And this story, like I've told before, it's kind of an amazing, I'll just say short, like basically the way that thing happened is that I had met Masabumi. Pooh is his nickname. And we started working as a trio with Thomas Morgan, the three of us at Pooh's place, pretty regularly. And he would record all of the sessions. We'd play free, and then you'd listen together, which was a really heavy process. I've never really done that again, or before. You know, where you're playing free, you know that it's being recorded, and you know that afterwards you're going to have to listen to it with somebody who has, well, in this case, like two people with like supersonic ears. And in the case of Pooh, you know, who was very, very has very strong feelings for what's right and what's wrong. Like, you know, you're playing free, but there's definitely like his way, like the way that he. But so you would, and then the next layer of the process was that he would give me, if it was a good session, like that he was happy with it, he would burn a CD, he'd give it to me and say, see if there's anything on there. Like, you played this melody, I remember, like, see if you can find it, and then see if there's anything else in there that you want to write out, because we need material for this record.
Oh, wow.
So I started transcribing improvisations between the three of us, and that became the material for that album. I think for 4 of the pieces or something of that album came out of that.
Yeah.
And so then that became a whole other layer. Then, you know, I was thought of it, wow, this is like fold upon fold, you know, you're just creating the substance of an improvisational language like that.
That's beautiful.
And then, so one of the things I'd written out was like writing out this melody, and I got a little over fussy about like the metric thing. So it's like 1 bar of 9, bar of 10, bar of 4, bar of, like that. Short, you know, but like every bar of it was like a different. And then here comes the recording session, and we're there, and Paul's there, and I think maybe it's the first thing we recorded. And I'm just meeting Paul, and to preface this, I had never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would get to play with Paul. But I had really started listening to him and Andrew Hill, kind of both of them, a lot, like in the preceding year and a half, and it had been like a real revolution for me, like in terms of, we were talking about writing.
Yeah, writing, incredible
you know, coming out of, especially from the encounter with John and Satoshi, like having suddenly a sense, okay, there's another way to think about time, about rhythm, about interaction, and a certain mystery, and that was missing in how I wrote things out, you know. So I started transcribing stuff from, like, especially the trio of Lovano, Frizzell, and Paul, and thinking like, how, like, just like you know, like, how do they phrase together? What's the, and I transcribed one of the versions of Mumbo Jumbo, the trio version of Mumbo Jumbo, where Paul plays this intro, plays this kind of beat, and then they come in,
like completely different kind of,
But I thought, okay, what if he's actually playing a pulse that they're relating to, and what meter would? So I started writing, and it looked crazy. It was like in 6/8 with like all these tuplets and all that. And during that recording session, 2 things happened. One is that this tune that I was telling you that I'd written, where that this transcription I'd made of an improvised piece where every bar was a different meter. I meet Paul, and from listening to him and all of this, you know, he looks at me, he realizes that I'm the one who has the charts, even though it's not my, you know, it's not my date. He goes, do I need a chart on this? He doesn't know me, right? And I look at him and I go, I'm not going to give Paul Motian like this thing. No way. You know, I go, no. I'm like, no, it's cool. And he looks at me, smiles, and goes, okay, you're going to count it off? And I go, nah, I'll just look at you. He goes, yeah, you'll just look at me, right? And I'm like, okay. And, you know, and Hino and I, like, practiced the melody a couple times, so Paul heard it. And then, boom, we go, and that's the take that's on the record. And Paul plays this perfect part where, like, everything fits, and it's beautiful, and it breathes. And you know, and, like, really thought about this, like, how, apart from, like, being mystical about it, you know, which you can be, like, you know, like, how does that happen? And the only kind of way that I can think about it is that he has perfect time. Yeah. Like a perfect sense of, I don't mean just metronomic time, I mean the time of the heartbeat, the time of, like, that blood takes to go around, like, you know, like, of breath and all that. He just has perfect time, and he slows everything down in his perception down, so that he always has all the time that he needs, all the time in the world, to decide where to hit the drums, if to hit them at all, what he's going to do. It's like it's never so fast that it's like, I don't know what to do, I'm not going to do anything here, I'll do this, you know, just one with its inner pulse, and then it just creates this pattern of sound and silence that's perfect, you know. So this thing of, like, rushing, to get back to the theater thing, this thing of, like, Robert Woodruff saying do it too soon or too late, what that creates is an awareness of the event as not being a point, you know, where X and Y meet, as being like this sphere. A sphere, it's not two-dimensional, it's a sphere with, like, a point of gravity in the center that pulls, and then you're somewhere in relation to that, but it's huge, it's big. Definitely. A microsecond becomes huge, and I think that's how all those cats, and Paul the most, Tom, everyone, I mean, and that's, like, the thing. So I mean, that I love that record, actually. That whole record is really special. And then we did another record under his name on Broadway. That one is the one with the Lauren.
I know that one. Yeah. What's the name of this one that you're talking about?
It's called Countercurrent.
Okay, I have to check it out. Okay, and it's under the Russ's name, or
it's called the Hino Kikuchi Quintet.
Okay, cool. I'll check it out.
Awesome. It's under both of their names. It's hard to find, but I think it's on. Somebody put it online. The whole thing online.
Or maybe some streaming platforms, or
possibly. I don't know.
Thanks so much, Michael, for sharing all this beautiful stuff. It's nice to hear you talk about all this. It's just inspirational. So thank you.
Great to talk to you. Man. Yeah.
Cool.
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.